HRN listeners. As we celebrate our 15th year, we are deepening our commitment to giving voice to the next generation of food systems storytellers, and we need your help. Our internship and fellowship programs help activate new possibilities for underrepresented and underestimated young people through experiential journalism, audio engineering, and production training. Through these unique programs, HRN helps food equity stewards build essential workforce readiness skills that expand their potential and foster economic mobility. Please consider supporting these critical programs. And with a minimum donation, you can be entered to win a dinner for two at an amazing restaurant in one of 8 cities and tickets to a concert at a great venue in one of those cities. We have incredible partners across the country who have donated, as they also share our passion for helping to educate the next generation of food systems storytellers. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. And make sure you donate before March 31st. Thank you.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. We're a member-supported food radio network broadcasting over 35 weekly shows live from Bushwick, Brooklyn. Join our hosts as they lead you through the world of craft brewing, behind the scenes of the restaurant industry, inside the battle over school food, and beyond. Find us at heritageradionetwork.org.
Hi, my name is Sam Ben-Ruby, and I'm the host of The Grape Nation on Heritage Radio Network. With this show, we bring wine to the people. Each week, we bring the best guests in wine on, taste different wines on air, and invite our listeners to taste with us. You'll find our approach to wine decidedly unsnobby. You can find The Grape Nation wherever you listen to podcasts and on heritageradionetwork.org.
My name is Chloe Sorvino. I head up all food, drink, and agriculture coverage at Forbes. I'm so thrilled to be having this conversation today. On the end, we have Chad Hardesty of Hardesty Cedars. Then we have Megan Bell of Margins Wine. Then Cole Thomas of Madison Wines. And Alex Pomerantz of Subject to Change. We're going to be talking about the economics of being a young winemaker today and all the challenges that go along with that. But to start, I want to open it up and say, what really brought you to the natural winemaking movement? And can you tell your stories?
Sure, I'll start. I got into natural wine through getting into wine, and then sort of, I think it's like the place where a lot of people end, and once you're there, you can't really go back. So yeah, I just got into it through drinking it at some shops, and was making wine at another wine company, and sort of pivoted out of that and opened Subject to Change up to sort of explore what I was most passionate about, which is natural wine.
Hi everyone, my name is Cole Thomas. I have Madsen Wines. We're based in Santa Cruz, California. And I got into wine because I was actually managing a seed library at UCSC in Santa Cruz. And we hosted an event at Santa Cruz Mountain Vineyard. And I met the winemaker, and he had the coolest story. He was like the coolest guy I'd ever met. And then I pretty much just bothered him until he gave me a job. Worked for him for about 5 years, bouncing back and forth between New Zealand, Australia, making wine down the Southern Hemisphere. And slowly kind of, through tasting wine and traveling, learning about how great wine can be without all those additives, like you can make great wine without, yeast that's grown in a laboratory. and so just kind of the owner of that winery would not let me do that with his wines. And so I was like, well, all right, I'm going to do it for myself. And so, yeah, here I am today, 3 years later. So.
I studied wine chemistry at UC Davis right out of high school, and that definitely wasn't like a natural program, but I was lucky to be there at the same time as a bunch of other producers in California who are making natural wine, who were between 5 and 10 years older than me at the time, who really introduced me to things. And after my first internship after college, which was at kind of a horrible Napa winery, I knew that I was never going to work in that type of wine production again, and I haven't.
Hi, I'm Chad Hardesty. I got into natural wine kind of on accident. I had a girlfriend whose father made natural wine in his backyard, kind of an old hippie, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And I made wine with him for a couple of years, and he says, "Okay, I can't do much for you anymore. I'm going to hand you over to my good friend Tony Coturri." And Tony Coturri is kind of considered the godfather of California natural wine. I kind of mentored under Tony for a little bit. At the same time, I was leasing land on a vineyard to grow organic vegetables. That's what I wanted to do in my hippie life. I was going to be a vegetable farmer and make wine in my backyard. The owner says, "Hey, you're not making any money on these selling these vegetables. Why don't you manage the vineyard for me? I'll pay you in grapes, and I'll let you use the winery." So that's kind of how that happened. So now I'm stuck. I got too much money into it.
You guys all have different stories, which is why I think this panel will have such a breadth of perspective. Since we're focusing on the economics of natural winemaking, I want to start off with a more slightly controversial topic. You know, the idea of becoming financially successful as a winemaker is kind of shunned from this movement. In a lot of ways, the movement romanticizes the struggle of the artisanal producer, while at the same time everyone else is kind of making money, the wine shops, the restaurants, the distributors. And at the same time, a lot of the credit is to them. But when a producer make it and get hyped, there are some Snickers that they sold out. So I want to talk about this tension and what has your experience really been around this, and what does financial success really look like to you?
Sure. I guess I'll start again. Yeah, this is something that I think about and talk about a lot, and it's kind of like a weird piece of the industry, because I do definitely feel like sort of like the artist struggle is kind of like this fetishized part of what people dig about natural wine, and like what helps, like, you know, kind of romanticize the whole thing for people. But yeah, the reality is, like, financially, the economics of a small wine business, particularly in California, they're vastly different than in Europe, because just the cost of doing business is very high, the cost of land is very high, the cost of labor is very high, and well, none of us, at least, and most people don't come from winemaking families that have, like, passed down, you know, centuries of knowledge and land and stuff like that. So you got to start from square one. You got to have some capital, and kind of how you deploy that is obviously up to you. But there is this like notion that, you know, people who start to like make money or show success are kind of like selling out. And I just don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think that there's opportunity and plenty of space for plenty of great producers to both run good and successful businesses while retaining like this sort of creative artist control, the same way that successful chefs do, the same way that successful movie writers and directors and producers do, the same way that anybody who's successful in a creative industry is entitled to becoming successful if you're good at it. And yeah, running the business is much harder than making the wine. I don't know if everybody would agree with that, but I certainly think that it is. It's the linchpin to everything, because you can't do it without money, and you can't run a business without money, obviously. But there's like, yeah, there is this, I'm kind of rambling, but I do feel like there is this like notion that once you're successful, your wines are no longer like hip and cool, which is stupid.
I also talk about this constantly. I think it's so important that we're honest about our financial situation in this line of work, because wine does have such a aura of ritziness to it, or at least money, even in a movement like this where we're kind of on the leftist side of things and we're trying to be radical, etc. But, you know, people who can afford wine have money, and for the most part. And I think that the people who are affording that wine and buying it should want the people making the wine to be able to afford to live. So my situation is that I pay myself $300 a month from my company, I support myself with a bunch of other jobs, from babysitting and dog sitting and house sitting and tutoring to working in a restaurant as like a busser. I did have a full-time job in wine production up till 2 years ago, but this company, my company, was growing and I couldn't work full-time anymore and keep doing things in that space. And I don't have investors and I don't have loans because a normal bank isn't going to give someone like us a loan. Agriculture, our type of agriculture, winemaking, even an ag bank we're not a good candidate for them because of our cash flow situation, which is almost non-existent. And
you've been doing it amazingly well, right? And we'll get there, but I think this is just really important to set this up, right? I mean, you've been really focusing on your business, getting direct to consumer, getting as much margin as you can possibly can, and ironically, your label's called Margins Wine, but it's.
Yeah, but I just think that if it's up to us in some capacity to share our story, and if more people knew our situation, like not being able to afford food for some of us, including me, and being on government assistance in that way, is that what we want the creators of this product that's radical, that we love? Do we want them to be in that situation? And does that mean paying more for the wines and buying them directly from the producer sometimes? Then maybe that can make all the difference in their life.
Cool.
Yeah, for me, I'm the same way. I have a day job as well. I manage 30 acres of vines in Corralitos, California, south of Santa Cruz, for a distillery. And so that kind of has paid the bills, gave me a place to live, stuff like that. So I'm working a full-time job doing that, and then full-time job making wine as well. It's it's incessant, it's endless. It's all, But the hope is one day that the brand becomes known and is successful, and you can be comfortable at some point in the future. But yeah, it's a lot of work just to make it work for me. Instead of paying people to go in the vineyard and do the farming, I do some of the farming myself, and that is all right, going on 12 hours again today, and it's wintertime, so even after the harvest, at one point when I was working for other people, it was oh, harvest is over, I'm going on vacation. Now it's oh, harvest is over, keep working. So yeah, it's a lot, but
I tell people that we have, especially if we're growing grapes, we have 3 jobs. First, we got to grow the fruit, then we have to make the wine, and then we have to sell it. And for me, the hardest part is selling it. And I've built a brand over the past 10 years, and now the challenge is keeping that brand alive, finding the money to buy bottles. I think we all talked about this. Maybe I want to get my wine into bottle after 9 months, but I've got to wait 15 months before I can afford to buy glass and corks and labels. So that's challenging. And maxed out credit cards. I've asked banks, been turned down. But at the same time, the last thing I want to do is owe more people more money. That's kind of why I've shied away from trying to find investors. I've borrowed money from friends. Vintage doesn't turn out, can't pay them back. And there goes a friendship. So these are definite challenges. I also have day jobs, which help to pay for this business, but I also have a young family that I have to support, and right now my wife is riding my ass, so that's why I'm doing subways and buses instead of Ubers this year. So, that's just, keeping it alive and trying to find the money. And then we want to be successful to a point. Of course, money coming down like rain would be wonderful, but I think just to have a sustainable, viable business to where you can pay yourself a living wage, and then the business sustains itself. There's always going to be ups and downs when you're, a small business, But just to get to the point of where, okay, this thing is kind of a well-oiled machine, when is that going to happen?
I guess I think it would be important to understand that there's like a lot of different business models up here, and none of them is right. There's no right and wrong.
The economics don't work for pretty much any of them.
Yeah, so we have taken on investors. We sort of have like a different approach, which is like we've tried to grow our volume quickly to the point where we look at the numbers and they make sense. They start to make sense. So we sort of know like what that volume threshold is for us. And the most challenging thing is cash flow because of the inherent nature of the business. Like all of your costs are sunk for so long into product before you can actually even bring it to market and then pay for all of the things that come with selling it and then hopefully get it all sold, which are all pretty big challenges, right? So like in the best case scenario, like turn and burn wines that don't see like long time in barrel, you've sunk in your farming costs or your labor, or you've purchased the fruit, so that cash is gone. The wine's in barrel, let's say until like February, so we're talking about like starting sinking costs in maybe like the winter when you prune, and then, or the spring when you prune, whenever, and then so that's sunk, and then that's all your farming, all your fruit, and then you've got like your time and your labor for crushing it, and your rent for your winery, and any other like capex type purchases like equipment that you need, and then you've got time in barrel, and then let's say like the next February at the earliest, generally speaking, you need to buy packaging, and then you get it to market, let's say like 2 months later if you're really like slamming, and then you've got your cash tied up for a year before the first bottle is in the market, and then you might be on like a year-long sales cycle from there. So like best case scenario, you're probably looking at like 12 to 24 months before you're like liquid on that wine again, and in that time you've already had to start the next vintage, and you probably want to grow your production if you're starting, and like the three of us are in our first few vintages, so we're constantly reinvesting, and I'm sure you are in other ways, although your business is more mature. So yeah, it's and like the upside, like the success, I think it's like if you can really make it, you're probably talking about, pulling down like very, very successful a very moderate salary relative to other industries.
And like what, like single digit margins, or?
Like I think, 10 years from now, if my business is very successful, like I could make six figures, but it's not like it's not like no one's becoming a millionaire off of this line of work.
Right, but financial success can mean a lot of different things, right? I mean, Meg, I was at your winery in June, and one of the things I was so struck by was you were saying that you just want to be able to afford organic produce, right? You just want to be able to like live by the practices that you're preaching through what you're making, and that was very powerful to me. And so as we're moving on, I want to talk about each model and what actually is working and what has been challenging in terms of as you scale, as you're trying to expand into new states, into more distribution. Who has had direct-to-consumer work for them, and what have been some of the pitfalls? Meg, do you want to start? I know you've done a lot here.
So at the beginning, because no one knew me and I was 25 when I started, I didn't have like a mentor or I wasn't connected to a famous person in the wine industry the way that so many young people are lucky to be that kind of float them at the beginning. So I started with a Kickstarter, and my goal was like $10,000. So anyone who started a business or has money knows that that's like nothing. So it was a modest beginning in that way, but I had this list of 75 people who had donated, who were like my original mailing list. And you can't give wine as a prize over Kickstarter, so they didn't get any wine, but they were on the mailing list and they started buying wine, most of them. And even now, my direct-to-consumer is, well, at the beginning, overwhelmingly people who are friends and family. And then in the last year, I realized that if I wanted to be like financially viable ever, I would need to be a lot more direct-to-consumer. So I started advertising on a local podcast. I'm also from Santa Cruz. And that is not a wine-related podcast, but the podcast grew a lot as I was growing, so I was able to just pay in wine instead of advertising money, because obviously we don't have that kind of budget. When I started working with them, they had like 800 followers, and now they have over 20,000. So those people signing up for my mailing list, being promoted over and over every week, has been huge for me. And now about 40% of the people that buy from me are from this podcast.
And I think the lesson there, right, is like be creative, be scrappy, and take bets on things that you might not work out, but clearly it did, and incredibly so. Chad, I know you have a different opinion of direct-to-consumer.
Well, it would be nice to sell everything direct-to-consumer because you're getting top dollar. Even if you discount your wines 10, 15%, you're still making a real good margin. Problem is where I'm at, Humboldt County, California, or the whole county has a population of 100,000 people in the whole county. So it's really tough to sell locally and to sell directly to consumer. I had some traffic through a website thinking I'd sell all my wines through the website, but it was maybe one person, every 2 months, looking for wine. And it got to the point where I would put that on the back burner. I wouldn't send wine out, and it ended up being that was a whole nother headache. And I think we talked about it on the phone. When you get into that, and you almost need a dedicated salesperson to deal with that because you're too busy dealing with all the other stuff. So economically, yeah, I mean, it would be wonderful, but I've pretty much given up on the direct-to-consumer at this point. It's easier for me to send, a pallet or two here, send a pallet to LA, a pallet's 56 cases. Sure, I don't get the money, but I get that cash flow that comes in right away, and then I can then go buy glass and labels and corks and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think it's difficult, marketing.
Right. I mean, you have to be, right, like the grape sourcer, the winemaker, the CEO, the accountant. It's a lot of roles for one job. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can only imagine what that's like. And obviously, all the cash flow coming out and then coming back in, it's a lot of risk to put on the table.
Mm-hmm. Well, so yeah, I mean, like anything else, it just requires a budget for it. And so you just kind of have to figure out, like Megan's alternative approach is like very scrappy and awesome, and like I love it, and I've never heard of that before, but like even that requires a budget because she's lucky enough to be able to trade them in wine, which is cheaper for her than cash, but it's like, and that's like a pretty sweet deal, but if you really want to do it, you have to sink resources into it just like everything else, and so you're just constantly deciding how to allocate resources. And if you want to allocate resources towards DTC and like blow it up, you have to like sink some dollars into professional marketing and professional publicity, and you also have to spend a ton of time dealing with the back end of that, which means like shipping logistics, compliance of shipping, just packing the wines up physically takes a long time. So that's either you or somebody that you're paying, which is just money that you have to allocate to it. So like I used to work for a company, and we opened up a tasting room in a small town in Sonoma Valley, and that it was like a break-even proposition by the time we staffed it and paid rent and all that stuff. So it was great, and it probably is still great for them, and it's probably growing, but it's just like it's such a long game. I guess if I could say one thing, it's just like it's such a long game. It's like you struggle for a long time, then you hopefully you like catch a break and you start building momentum, and you reach a point where you sort of hit like what I hope is going to be like financial equilibrium. And so that's like, that to me is like, that's going to be success, when like paying bills isn't done by maxing out another credit card. That's like the goal right now. That's to get back to like equilibrium. And then you kind of, you invest dollars in things that pay off like a long time down the road. And so the question is just, how do you keep it afloat in the interim? I don't know.
So what's the worst business mistake you've ever made? Obviously, you're passionate about winemaking, but you've also had to, be the accountant, be the financial projector, be the strategist. And I ask this because I think a lot of people listening to this are producers themselves and will want to learn from your mistakes.
I'm not starting.
Starting a winery? No. I'm just kidding. That was a joke.
For me, a big detrimental. I had a bad vintage, 2014. I sunk a lot of capital into fruit, grapes, that it was just a bad vintage. It did not turn out. The whole 2014, I think I made 600 cases, and I can't sell one bottle of it. And that's because I brought in fruit that was subprime, ended up having too much VA, and the wine basically turned to vinegar. I don't use sulfites. I don't do anything like that. It was great when I bottled it, sold a few cases, and then I got some calls, and I go and try the wine, and I'm like, oh, shit, well, I guess I can't sell this. So there goes, then it took me 2 years then to come back from that. So these are just things that, I chose this path, so I have nobody to blame but myself.
Yeah, but to your point, right? I mean, grapes are super expensive, super hard to source. There's a lack of supply of the quality grapes, especially organic, that I'm sure you want. Meg, you source from underutilized grapes. I'm sure it's hard. I know everyone can probably speak to that, right?
Are you going? Are you ready?
One of the biggest mistakes I made was actually this year. I took on a new vineyard. Most of the vineyards. So how I have sourced my grapes is I actually farm the vineyards for the landowners, and then that subsidizes the grape prices. So that's worked great in the Santa Cruz Mountains with the local vineyards. But I met a woman that had a vineyard in Carmel Valley. And it's an amazing vineyard, super high elevation on calcareous sandstone. I was like, this is amazing, Syrah, I want to make this. And so I told her, I should never have told her, that I could farm the vineyard for her and like make a decent wine from it. And I just didn't allocate enough time to that vineyard because it was a 2-hour drive. And it ended up, we didn't net the vineyard, and because it's a lot of work and a lot of time to net a vineyard. And the birds ate everything. And so I put a bunch of time and a bunch of money into the vineyard and ended up with a very, very little crop. So it's things like that. I mean, there's a ton of risk in the industry too. And the farther you go back, as far as production-wise, like if you are in the vineyard as well, you just assume more risk, and you really don't know what you're going to get every year. And you hope that when it's in barrel, it becomes something pretty and something that people will enjoy. But you really have no idea. So,
I narrowly dodged my biggest mistake, which was my first vintage. Backtrack. So, I'm just gonna do this one. I'm only gonna say it once. As a woman in the wine industry, I have always, I think, as a woman in general, trained to think that I know less than other people and listen to other people, specifically men, that talk with confidence, if not experience. And this happened. Someone told me, who is in the buying side of wine, that, oh yeah, why'd you only do 40 cases unsulfured? You should do your entire production unsulfured. And I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to take that risk. Like, I'm 25 and no one knows who I am, and I don't know if someone's going to want to buy this wine. Like, I don't know this vineyard. It's my first time doing this. Like, what if something goes wrong? Like, not like I'm adding tons of sulfur, but at least it's like, you know, just in case something goes wrong. And I thought about doing that, and then I ended up not doing it. And it's one of the things I'm most proud of for choosing like what I wanted. And the wine that I sulfured that year, it was a white wine, was way easier to sell right away. Turned out the unsulfured wine was way better later, but I didn't know that yet because I didn't have experience with that vineyard. So I think not believing in your own experience and what you've learned from that experience instead of letting other people who are just speaking with confidence convince you that you're not like right or worthy.
I'm going to give like a slightly more existential and less individually practical answer, which is I think the biggest mistake that I've made, which is widely applicable to almost anything in life, is rushing into things and making decisions because you think you have to before you're ready to. And this sounds like way more kind of like heady than it really is, but this is applied to me with my business partnerships. This is applied to me with other business relationships, and it's cost my business and my well-being a lot of hardship. And so this applies to a lot of things throughout the whole like ecosystem of a winery. So this is, you know, jumping into a vineyard because you're really excited about it, jumping into a business relationship because you're really excited about it, signing on with a distributor because you're really excited about it before you've vetted or really felt comfortable about it. And I think a lot of that comes from being young. A lot of that comes from not having decades of business experience. And some of it, and a lot of it is driven by just like passion and excitement, and you're just like, you want to go and you want to get out there and you want to like show what you've got, and then you realize that you would have probably been better served maybe being a little more patient. So yeah.
Honestly, that's what I hear from the startup CEOs to the billionaires I speak to. So that's a great lesson. Let's talk about financing. Everyone here has had a different experience with it. Obviously, historically, it's been hard to get private investors or institutional investors like banks, small business loans for this kind of product. What has your experience been? And obviously, tell us what you would be using capital for. Obviously, it could build out a winery. It could help you expand to new states. It could help you buy land to build your own winery so you can source your grapes directly, which would save margin as well. And where do you want to see the financing potentially go?
So investing money into things that can save you margin is part of the long game, which is an approach that like you're constantly deciding about whether you're in the moment in a decision you need to like err on the side of the long game or err on the side of the short game. And so investing money into things like infrastructure, CapEx type things like.
And you have investors, right?
Yeah, so we do have investors. So
how'd you find them?
They are friends, which I'm very fortunate to have those friends. I'm very fortunate that they believed in me enough to part with a very substantial amount of money to get our project off the ground, and we used almost all of that money on a very long-term approach, which was sinking almost the very, very vast majority of our seed capital into CapEx type expenses and not saving enough for operating capital. So we spend a lot of money on like equipment and infrastructure, which is great because we spend so much less money on like what would otherwise basically be custom crush fees. So we have our own gear so that we can do things ourselves and make our own wines, which also vastly improves wine quality, I think, because we can like do our own thing. And we're not paying like price per ton on everything that we crush, but it has led to significant cash flow issues. And so as far as where the money comes from, institutional lenders are not an option. We've all discussed that. We've all sort of barked up that tree, and it just isn't going to happen. The only way to get an institutional lender to back a business like this is if you're already independently wealthy or have somebody that's independently wealthy that's going to provide collateral for the loan, which is the same thing as basically getting money from that person or having money. So unfortunately, that's not an option. So the friends and family route, I think, is the only way that wineries get off the ground without starting with tons of money from another business. And there's like kind of this old adage, like, how do you make a small fortune in the wine industry? You start with a large fortune.
Right.
I would have loved to have started with
these aren't like
large.
the Napa wineries that like the historic banker cliches have always been investing in, right? And honestly, I'm excited to see like when our generation gets a certain amount of wealth, like what happens in terms of the angel investing scene with natural wine. But I'm curious, who else is looking to raise, or who else could use the capital, and what would you be doing with it?
I contacted a couple of different institutions for money this last year because I outgrew the custom crush facility that I was working in. The winemaker was like, yep, you're at 40 barrels, you got to go find a new home. So I built out a small barn, and I contacted, most of the institutions were like, yep, nope, there's no way, we can't, for this return, we can't.
And is it because of where you're growing wine, and it's not just being a historical wine growing region or winemaking region?
It's just being in business. I haven't been in business that long. I've only been selling wine since 2018. 2016 was our first vintage producing wine, but then you have to wait, a year or two until you can actually sell it. So I hadn't been in business long enough to get like financial institution money. And then I went to like a brewery finance institution. They're like, yeah, we can loan you money at like 25, 30%. I'm like, oh, I'm good.
Right, and that's exactly the point though, right? I mean, like, when you're really struggling to find a deal, the deals you might get are not worth it, or maybe terrible for you. You're a founder. You've been working so hard to be building this winery and building this brand, that why then give it up for some 30% interest rate?
Yeah, and the money's got to get you to the next step. Like, it can't just keep you in business for another year. It's got to be like, in my opinion, it's got to be growth to get to a place of profitability, and or at least to then go out and look for investors who will then take on a percentage of the business, but at least the business is valued higher at that time.
And to take certain risk off the table, right? I mean, just in terms of how much purchasing you're selling out, you're selling, or you have to put out the door to buy the grapes, right? And there's a certain risk involved with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I still receive letters from different money lending institutions all the time addressed to margin swine. It's a typo. Margin
You're not
swine.
a pig business.
But like Cole said, they're not good options. So I'm at the very beginning of starting to look for investors. I just realized that this last year, when it wasn't going to happen with a bank, and I've had one person approach me who wanted to actually give me money, which was amazing, because I've just been talking about it all the time and thinking, who are you supposed to ask? And how weird, and your family's already helped you so much, and especially if you've done a Kickstarter, you don't really want to ask them for more. And I was really lucky this last summer. I needed a few $1,000 immediately. And someone told someone else, and that person donated me the money, which is the kind of thing, like Alex said, that makes you be like, wow, someone believes in me. this makes me want to keep going. Like, I can't disappoint this person who gave me this gift. But our money disappears like that, and that's not a lot of money. And, we need 4 or 5 or 20 times that to be able to be where we are. So what I would do with that money, what I'm planning on doing, is being able to branch out into my own space. Warehouse rent in our area, Santa Cruz, is insanely expensive. Cost of living there is a lot. Being able to buy my own equipment. Right now, I don't own anything but barrels, and then I share equipment in a shared facility, which is how I've made it work. But I'm getting to the point. I also make 40 barrels, which is 1,000 cases, that you kind of need your own space once you're above that.
And before we go to Chad, can you explain a little bit more about how that shared services model and your shared winery model works? Because I think that's a fascinating concept, and it's definitely, it's kind of like an incubator in a lot of ways, or an accelerator in the startup world.
Yeah, so at the beginning, the way that I was able to do what I was doing was the first 2 vintages, I made my wine with a job that I worked full-time at a winery, and I didn't have to pay for it at all. I wasn't paid very much, $25 an hour, which is great for the wine industry, sadly. And then most of my pay came from getting to use their equipment and space. Then when I moved into the facility I am now, I was able to afford it by work trading most of it. I paid a very small amount per month, not based on production, but flat fee, but needed to be available basically all the time to help farm vineyards for someone else, which was very costly in time, and I wasn't getting paid, but I didn't have to pay thousands a month to have space in a facility. But then I didn't have any money for my own life, rent and stuff. But without that arrangement, what I do now wouldn't have been possible.
Yeah, so I was fortunate to have a space where I traded labor for the use of the equipment in the winery. And this is the first year that I'm actually being charged rent because there's a new owner, and I'm already looking at ways to get out. That was the only real way that I was able to get off the ground. The equipment is ridiculously expensive. You can find barrels relatively inexpensive that are used, but there comes risk with that. Barrels could be infected with something, you don't know what. To buy stainless steel tanks, stainless steel is a fortune. Wine presses, even just a simple basket press, if you can find used, you're talking, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $10,000. So all these things add up, and then throw rent on top of that, and people are wanting rent what I have to pay. I also have to pay to live somewhere. Now I've got to pay the same amount of money to rent space. So yeah, it's challenging. I was fortunate to have other businesses, but I've kind of driven those businesses into the ground, taking money from them to keep this going. So it's definitely, winemaking and farming. My grandfather grew up farming, and he says farming is gambling, and that's pretty much all it is. You're gambling from year to year. There's nothing that's guaranteed. So that's also hard when you go and ask investors. A lot of people don't want to lend you money on something that isn't a sure thing. So.
Man, yeah, this is a huge topic, so I'll try to be somewhat concise, but I feel you trying to steer the conversation
you're
towards
good. I'm gonna break for a question. If there's any question to answer, let's start thinking about your questions, guys, after this comment.
Okay, so you've touched on a few things, talking about angel investors becoming interested in this space. And so, to sort of bring it towards, what does, private money investing look like? Mm-hmm. It's so challenging to create a business model that is investable for this kind of business. So in order to do that, again, like you have to get somebody who's in for the long game with you. You have to get somebody who you're like philosophically aligned with, and you have to ideally get people that either love you or love wine, which is, or hopefully both. But it's not like investors aren't chasing this the way that they chase like tech startups or any other kind of startup, because it's not, nobody invests in a winery because they want to make a lot of money. They invest in a winery because they love wine, and they probably love the person who's making that wine and steering that company. And so I think that because our products are geared towards a younger audience, that makes it increasingly difficult. And this is what, because we talked about it on the phone, so I know that this is like part of the theme here, which is, as our target market's wealth becomes greater, there may be more private money interest in what we do, but traditionally speaking, like a lot of the wealth has been tied up with like baby boomers who are more, this is a gross overgeneralization by the way, but I'm just gonna put it out there. That is a generation that is not after Pet Nat of Carignan. They're after like sexy wines from Napa, and those are the wineries they want to invest in because that's what they like to drink, and that's what their friends like to drink, and that's what they want to show off. And again, I realize that that's an overgeneralization, but it's largely...
You're backed up by trend, don't worry.
Huh?
You're backed up by trend.
So yeah, I think it will be really interesting to see what happens in terms of like interest in investment in these types of businesses, because it's very helpful to have investors who have business experience that can help guide you through challenging business problems. You're not bringing them on for their wine expertise. That's what we're for. You're bringing them on because you want the help solving complex business problems that they've probably experienced in other industries. And so it will be very interesting to see what happens when our target market has more money to potentially look at this type of passion investment.
Thank you for that. So are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, please. Are you a grower?
We do not grow our own grapes, technically speaking.
So have you worked with the USDA in terms of microloans, and where are your biggest expenses today?
I have not, but I'm going to investigate that now. Cool. Yeah, I will definitely investigate that. Yes, I do sink quite a bit of the money in the viticulture and the farming. Whether it's putting the bird nets on or pruning, or it's a lot of work. You either pay for the grapes or you pay for the farming. There's no way around it. If you want to make good wine, the grapes have to be good. I mean, it's really
and the California and the point of this panel, honestly, is the fact that like in California, it's super hard to be doing this right now, and for the U.S. natural wine movement to continue, it has to become sustainable for these producers in California, right? It's different from France, it's different from Italy, it's different in a lot of other places.
Totally, yeah. So yeah, I sink quite a lot into the viticulture, but also bottles and barrels and all the other, just the packaging itself is expensive. So, and it's all at the same time.
I don't know if this is helpful, but this year I spent $30,000 on grapes, and I'm making 1,000 cases. So and I'm buying like not expensive grapes. So that's like
and your
a
wines
good portion.
Are dang.
What was that?
And your wines are dang.
Oh, thanks, Chloe. So that's where a lot of the money's going, just grapes. And then either paying per ton to crush that somewhere or paying for a facility is another big expense. I mean, there's like thousands of hidden ones too, but those are the big ones.
It's pretty much spread out across everything that I have to buy. I guess grapes probably are number one. When I farmed the fruit before purchasing fruit, it was probably it's probably not quite as expensive as just buying grapes, depending on where you're getting them from. But I never factored in my own labor into that, so it probably does come out to about equal. And then there's rent, whether it's the space, the winery space. The winery I use is too small for me to keep all my case goods at, so I have to rent a warehouse down in Sonoma and truck all my bottled wines there, and then I have to pay a monthly fee of $400 a month just to keep my wines there, and then they charge me to send them out, put them together on a pallet. It's hard to nail down what's the most expensive. Everything in just glass, grapes, and everything. You're probably looking at $75 to $85 to produce a case of wine, and then we have to sell them, for 120 to 150, to a distributor. It'd be nice to sell directly to consumer, and you're talking $300 a case, and then your margins are really going up. But if you're only making $30 on a case of wine, and sometimes it's those wines sit in the warehouse for 2 years, and I'm paying $400 a month for 2 years, that makes those wines more and more expensive. Yet I can't, you can't pass that on to the consumer.
This whole movement is based on this kind of inexpensive young people drinking wine in a lot of ways, but there's a price ceiling in a lot of ways.
There is. With natural wine, a lot of people don't want to pay a premium. They don't consider them trophy wines. They're not going to want to pay $60 at a wine shop for natural. They're looking for $20 bottles of wine. So that, when you're only making 500 to 1,000 cases of wine, that's, it makes things tough.
$300, I think, was it? Not 300,000. Yeah.
That'd be it.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. No, thank you for your question. Honestly, I was going to ask a similar question, right? Like, what are some regulations that would help you, or what are some things that, what can we do in the audience, or who's listening? Like, what is a call to action? Is it buying more direct to consumer, if that's applicable? What are some regulations that could help you or lessen the burden on your small businesses? And is that okay?
Well, I don't think there's not one answer. It's like a multi-layered approach towards, so I mean, where we're starting is in this room, and the fact that people are interested enough to come listen to us talk about this and are asking questions and are engaged and involved, and totally. So I think, so being like these, I mean, look, natural wine, like the proliferation of natural wine just over the last 5 years is insane. Like, I would actually like to see this answer. How many people in here didn't drink natural wine 5 years ago? Could you raise your hand? Like, that's awesome. So, yeah, it is growing. There's tons of good shops in Manhattan that sell natural wine, but I hear your point, which is like, yeah, you go into a shop, you ask for natural wine, like a traditional shop, and they like, well, especially if you're like someone like us, because we're younger, they just look at you like you're a stupid hipster that doesn't know anything about wine. And then, you know, you're a stuffy old guy that doesn't know anything about real wine. So fuck you. No, just kidding. Yeah, I think like the issue is, so linking this to something that people know a lot about, which is food. David Chang wrote an article a while ago. I don't remember what publication it was in. I don't think it was Lucky Peach, but it's basically like people need to get comfortable paying way more money for food, or restaurants aren't going to make it, or they're not going to be making the food that you want to eat, because the food that you want to eat can't cost what you want to pay for it. So like there is this very difficult catch-22, which is like, if we wanted to make money, it's like, oh, you're not making enough money? Just charge double for your wine. It's like, well, we can't do that because no one's going to buy a $60 bottle of Carignan Petnat from Mendocino. And frankly, even if they would, I don't want it to cost that much, because I want people to be able to, I want people, my peer set, to be able to afford to buy the wine. So it is challenging. I think like awareness in general, like I don't think any legislation is going to come through. I don't think the government's all of a sudden going to start subsidizing small wineries, which
even like local state by state regulations though.
Like I'm struggling to consider what would actually be realistic and helpful. You know, like it'd be great if the state regulated that everybody has to drink natty juice, but I don't really foresee that happening. So I'm not sure what, like, practically speaking, is gonna help, because like a direct subsidy is not really in the cards, right?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the place to talk about taxes and all that, but anyway, does anyone else have a thought on that, or any other ways that you think? Oh, is there another question? Oh.
We can all self-distribute in California, but I know that Megan and I don't. Do you guys self-distribute?
No.
Yeah, so
I
too much
currently
work.
do. Yeah,
You do?
Yeah, I currently do.
you need the reach of a distributor. Yeah, you need the reach. You need to get into accounts that you don't know, and the only way to do that is with like a broader sales base.
Is the American wine market only wine market for American natural wine?
So the question is the American wine market the only wine market for natural wine? And I'm curious. In America.
We export wine.
I sent some to London, and I used to sell in Montreal, but I think it was more or less a novelty for them. And I don't sell in Montreal anymore, and you know, like London's bought 5 cases over the last 2 years, so it's not, the majority of what we sell, I believe, is strictly here in the U.S. Yeah.
I've had a ton of interest from other like international markets, but I usually say no, because even though those markets are there, I'm only going to make like FOB freight on board wholesale pricing versus connecting with consumers that live in the same country as me, who might join the mailing lists and might start buying directly from me, which is like my goal.
I'll just add on to that exporting is awesome because it like grows your brand awareness, and it's a lot of like credibility when your wines are sold in like Tokyo or Paris, or insert great food city here. But you also have to wait a very long time to get paid, because it takes a long time to get there. And then like if you're having trouble getting paid, chasing somebody down in another country is a lot harder than like calling your distributor in whatever, some state in America.
So all of you guys have moved into being a small business, and you're doing your own marketing, you're doing your own sales, you're doing your own admin work, you're doing your own everything. So like, let's say you get that investment, you get that windfall of cash. What's your first prize? What's the first thing that you're like, get this off my plate, someone else take care of it?
So the question is, if you do get that capital, what's the first thing that you will get off?
The
The first person that will take something off your hands.
I would just spend it on a vacation because I haven't had one of those. No.
This is what we mean by spreading out equity and getting more stakeholders involved in the actual wine movement.
I would pay someone to handle all of the business part of it. I would love to just make wine and focus on that. But currently I do all of it. But yeah, paying someone to just do the finances would be amazing.
Meg, you told me you hired your first accountant?
Yeah, I have an accountant and a bookkeeper because I think it's crucial. Especially
Has it been helpful?
Yeah, and I don't know anything about that, and I can only learn so many things, I'm busy. I would hire someone to manage all direct-to-consumer. I think a great example in our industry of that is Martha Stewman. She and I went to college together. She was in a very similar place that I am now a couple of years ago, hired a DTC person, and now she's freaking killing it. So I think we can learn from that type of model.
Yeah, we actually have 2 employees and consultants for things like accounting and stuff. But I would have to wholeheartedly agree with Megan that I'd probably. So I have a full-time production person and a part-time general manager, but I would hire somebody to be devoted to direct consumer sales and marketing.
Sorry, we have time for one last question. So the question is, what was your first step in formulating your business plan when you did go to banks or when you're coming up with this business? That's a great question. I think a lot of people really don't know where to start.
I looked at a few examples, and I had a great mentor and I kind of used his cost profile and used all the expenditures that he was having and to write a business plan, and I forecasted it way too many years into the future. But there's so many hidden little costs that you just don't think of. You can't just quantify the barrels and the wine and the grapes and the corks and the labels and stuff like that. There's so many little things just driving to the vineyards and stuff like that add up. But yeah, it's humbling to see the numbers at the end of the business plan.
I think I didn't really have a plan. I just kind of let the business grow organically or naturally. And I don't know if that was the best approach in hindsight. And I actually went to school. I have a minor in business, but I hire an accountant, and I'm horrible at writing business plans. And I'm horrible at keeping the book, so it's hard to write a good business plan if you really don't know where your business stands and you don't have confidence to say this is where it's going to be or where I want to be. Right now I just want it to pay for itself and provide me with some pride and maybe pay some bills. So
I didn't have a real business plan either. I kind of wrote something for Kickstarter, but it was more theoretical, I would say, less actually related to numbers because I didn't know what the costs were going to be. And I think that's why I didn't write it originally, because I feel like I have a good sense of what I do and don't know, which is part of why I hired these other numbers people. And now that I have that data from them, it's something I'm just starting to write now as I look for investors.
I wrote a pretty elaborate business plan, and
that you're going to share with all of us, right?
Well, so the funny thing about it is, I actually went to school for business and studied business and wrote an elaborate business plan, and what it did for me was it helped me raise capital because it looked serious, which was invaluable. However, then I rewrote it a year in to true up to actual, and then I rewrote it another year in to true up to actual, which is right now. We've been in business for about 2 years, and it's never been correct, not even moderately. So I think it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, most startups are about like pivoting and being agile and like adapting. So having something on paper is helpful, and having an understanding of what's on that paper is helpful, but being a smart decision maker and doing what's best for your business and protecting yourself and your business and trying to grow is what's ultimately super important. So having being able to pencil it all out perfectly is, I think, less important than being a great operator.
Well, guys, I think we're actually over time, unfortunately, but if you have any other questions, feel free to grab any of the panelists. They all have amazing wines. Go sample them if you haven't yet. Thank you all for hanging in there with us. And if we leave you with anything, please buy direct when you can. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
This program is powered by Simplecast.
Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content and to hear about exclusive events, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at heritage_radio. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be a part of the food world's most innovative community? Rate the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join our community by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. Thanks for listening.
Hey, it's Francis Lamb, host of The Splendid Table. Every week on our show, we talk about food and cooking and the meanings of food and cooking. We talk with the most interesting people in food about their techniques, their culture, and everything in between. Whether it's about how fried chicken took over the world or how Instagram changes the way people are actually eating. It's a food show where everyone is welcome. Come join us. You can listen to The Splendid Table wherever you get your podcasts.